Okay. Welcome to the lesson on farming and the emergence of complex societies from 10,000 to 1000 BCE. Our current way of life is rooted in the complex societies traditionally called civilizations that originated in Afro-Eurasia between about 4000 and 1500 BCE. Many of the integral features of our own world are developed in these societies during this period. We have inherited from the builders of those societies many fundamental ideas and inventions, including urban living, the state, social class hierarchies, writing, institutionalized religion, mathematics, astronomy, and wheeled transportation. This unit focuses on the earliest civilizations that arose in the valleys of the Tigris-Euphrates River, today called Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, the Nile River in Egypt, and the Indus River today in Pakistan and northwest India. During the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE, the unit also considers, more briefly, the early consideration of the Yellow River in China, which emerged later than the other three. This unit will help us to understand the characteristics of complex societies and what we have in common with them and the differences that we also have with them. During this unit, we will be able to describe the major characteristics of complex societies, compare their way of life to life in the 21st century, describe the changes that occurred in the three primary human relationships, assess the advantages and disadvantages to living in complex societies compared with those societies, communal societies that came before them, hunters and gatherers as an example, and analyze primary source documents, and assess their readability and reliability. Scholars have differed about where to mark the historical dividing line between the era of Neolithic farming, primitive farming societies in Afro-Eurasia, and the emergence of complex societies or civilizations. Historians generally agree, however, that the early complex societies had distinguishing characteristics, though not every complex society necessarily displayed all of these. And the characteristics include the development of cities, the state, which is a central governing authority in which a relatively small group of people exercise, to some extent, command over the economic and political life of everyone else. Membership in the state was not based on kinship relations, but on common submission to the governing authority. Occupational specializations. Part of the population engaged in jobs or professions other than growing food and herding animals, and were able to make developments and innovations in those specializations. Social class hierarchy. Typically, a small privileged elite occupy the top rank. The vast majority of farmers, herders, and laborers were at the bottom. A minority population of people possessed commercial wealth or special skills continued or constituted the middle. There were also institutions for collecting, storing, and distributing surplus products staffed by officials and managers. During this time, we also see the emergence of institutionalized religion, monumental public architecture, writing, and the creation and accumulation of knowledge in mathematics, engineering, astronomy, and other technical and scientific fields. If we're starting at this place and we go back 5,000 years, we see that the trend towards larger and denser populations practicing farming was occurring only in limited areas of Afro-Eurasia. In most regions, the frontier of farming advanced slowly. However, in three regions, which we'll look at in a minute, the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, and the Indus rivers, startling changes were occurring. In those places, and nearly simultaneously, populations were growing at much faster rate than at any other time in history before this, and humans were beginning to organize themselves in remarkably new ways. These three complex societies all arose within the midsection of the Great Arid Zone, which you see on your screen. That is, the belt of arid or semi-arid territory that extends all the way across Afro-Eurasia. Climatologists have hypothesized that the hot, dry conditions that prevail today in those regions were set around 4000 BCE. Complex society was therefore possible only because spring runoff from wet highlands flowed into the rivers that crossed the arid country on their way to the sea. The Tigris and the Euphrates originate in cool, green mountains of Anatolia, which you see here today in modern-day Iraq. The Indus flowlands from the Tibetan Himalayas, and the Nile had its source, which you see on the screen, in Ethiopia, in the highlands of Ethiopia and the tropical lands of East Africa. Here you see the Indus Valley flow from the Tibetan highlands. In fact, we may think of the three early river valley civilizations as all emerging in one region, in the middle part of the Great Arid Zone. All three occupied approximately the same belt of latitude, shared a similar climate, and produced the same basic crops centered on wheat and barley. You have learned this lesson in Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. Also, trade took place between all three by both land and sea. Complex society appears to have arisen first in the southern region of Mesopotamia, which is in the center of the map, and then in Egypt, which is to the east of that location, or excuse me, to the west, and then to the Indus Valley in 2600 BCE. In East Asia, sighted society appeared in the Yellow River Valley of northern China, but not until around 1700 BCE. During the gradual transition to complex societies, human relations to the environment, to other humans, and to ideas changed. First, the development of these societies was inseparable from humans finding new and more intensive ways to exploit the environment and produce surplus wealth and sustain growing populations. Second, rising production and population required new institutions to manage the interactions among individuals and groups who lived in much closer proximity to one another and had more complicated economic, social, and political relations. The state served to organize and regulate human behavior on a much larger scale than had ever been known in the early millennia of farming. Third, religious ideas became more systematized and expanded their focus from the world of nature to concern with human social relations. Writing promoted the spread of ideas, but also limited access to them because only a small minority achieved literacy. So during this time of the emergence of complex societies, we will begin to analyze all sorts of historical artifacts which helped shape the main foundation for societies that would come after them, and we will be able to see quite a bit of similarities between the ancient world and the world of the 21st century that we are inhabiting today. Thank you for your time.